Welcome to the IDAI's Supplying Space on our podcast network. I'm your host, David Beck. I'm the director for the Center for Industrial Innovations and Systems here at IDIA. And today I have an amazing interview with Dr. Pinar Mesci. She is with Axiom Space, and we cannot wait to hear what she has to say.
Hi, David. Thank you so much for having me, and thank you for the very kind introduction.
Dr. Mesci, could you tell us more about your specific role and Axiom Space's role in commercialization?
So, I've been working for Axiom Space for a little bit over 3.5 years. We are a company that is building the commercial space station, the successor to the International Space Station. We actually, in fact, have the exclusive contract that we got through NASA to be able to connect directly to the International Space Station, and then hopefully ensure the continuity of research on our commercial platform, and then eventually rendezvous with our other modules, some of them that are going to be dedicated to research and manufacturing that I'm going to tell you a little bit more in a couple of minutes. So then we can continue having research in microgravity once the International Space Station is set to be decommissioned. While we're making this commercial space station, we have actually conducted several private astronaut missions to the International Space Station. Actually, 4 to date. We have conducted hundreds of research experiments while we're up there. We have sent more than 10 nations, some of them that have never been to space before, and to be able to conduct diverse portfolios of research and also STEM outreach. So that's we have been doing. We have actually also been awarded with the 5th private astronaut mission. That's going to be sometime next year. And then finally, we are also making the next generation spacesuit. So next time we're going to be walking on the moon, the astronauts are going to be wearing an Axiom spacesuit. So within this company, what is my role? So my official title is Global Head of Biomanufacturing and Biotechnology. And what does that mean? So obviously we're making this commercial space station, but this is not a place to just, go and hang out, but it's actually try to see what we can make up there that we cannot make here on the ground to benefit all patients everywhere and in general humanity. I'm looking into from this perspective on the biological products, and some of the things that we're looking is things that have very high potential therapeutic value. However, they are faced with several bottlenecks here on the ground because of gravity, and microgravity helps us look at the same problems through a different lens. So I'm happy to talk a little bit more about those different types of projects, David.
Yes.
But I also wanted to just make sure that I give like a broad overview first before we dive in.
Oh, well, at this podcast, we nerd out. So there's no scripted version. Each podcast is its own entity in itself. And I think it's important to unlock those capabilities for our audience so that our audience, click there is telling me I'm making the right thoughts here, for our audience so that they can watch this on YouTube, engage, and we can figure people out in ways they never understood and how they're connected to space. Everybody's connected to space some kind of way or some form. And I think this is one of the unique possibilities of keeping our health in check and living longer and have an opportunity to enjoy our lives through what Axion's doing and what you're doing personally with these technologies and building a space station. How would you connect the space between space and medicine as you look at how Axiom is building out this aperture?
Yeah, so absolutely, David. So as your audience might already be aware, there's actually a lot of things in our day life that we're using that were made for space or in space that we may not be aware. Like, all the, one of the examples that I always give, I don't know how much people realize, but for instance, the use of the Velcro that we use a lot on the space station that has been developed for space, but now we are using it here on the ground. All the cordless vacuums, or to be able to look at the temperature, when if you have a fever or whatnot. So my hope is that one day we're going to have products like this that are made in space, that we would be like, how did we ever imagine our lives without them? So therapeutic products or pharmaceutical products that will be generated, made in space, but they will be so much part of our lives, and we'll be like, oh, how did we ever live without them? So some of the things that we're looking into, we have a pretty diverse portfolio on the biological side. We also have a full team working on advanced materials like semiconductors and things like that. But maybe you'll have them one day in your podcast as well, so they can dive into that a little bit more deeply. But on my end, some of the things that we're looking into are, for instance, cancer research. That I know that you have been part of those conversations. These are studies that we're conducting with UC San Diego here in California with Dr. Catriona Jameson. So I do want to talk a little bit more about that research because it's a pretty uh, it's pretty cool, but also they are able to advance a lot of the parts of this research into clinic actually. So this team has been flying with us since our AX1 mission, and we are actually looking into how tumor organoids, so these self-assembled three-dimensional structures that are generated from different types of tumors, behave in microgravity, and how some of the disease pathways, in their case, what they're looking is a pathway called ADAR1, that is a DNA RNA editing enzyme, that they have previously studied as one of the drivers of cancer. How does that pathway impacted by microgravity? And what we have observed is that when we're sending these tumor organoids in microgravity on the International Space Station, they actually grow much faster than how they would grow here on the ground. And in fact, that disease pathway is also very much activated in microgravity. So why is that important for us to know? So why are we doing this even in microgravity? Well, first of all, that will help us get the results faster, because we can get to those sizes of tumors that can grow in patients in a much faster fashion, so we can get to results faster. But also it can give us insights on some of the tumors that might be much more aggressive here on the ground in patients, and might help us find therapies that work on them. And in fact, on AX2, AX3, and AX4 missions, we have tested two drugs. One drug that has been previously approved by the FDA, fedratinib, and another drug that the team has been developing called rebexinib, that act on that ADAR1 pathway. And to our surprise, actually, the rebexinib, so the new drug that the team has been developing, has worked better than its predecessor that was the FDA approved one. So now imagine you have a model that grows much faster in microgravity, and now you're able to screen drugs or validate drugs in this model that is much more aggressive. Well, guess what? Maybe now you have a better chance in having an intervention in those patients that might have a much aggressive form of tumor or cancer. Throughout these different studies, what we are also very keen on doing at Axiom Space is make sure that the results that we have are repeatable. So this is why the fact that this team has flown with us multiple times was very good, because we had reproducible data. So this is not one-off. We have publishable data, which is very important for the rest of the scientific community to know as well. And also, so then we can share all these things with the rest of the community. But also, we were able to expand the research to other types of tumors as well. So this drug now has been tested in a variety of tumors. So we're going to be continuing testing those, and then see how that if the drug is also able to arrest the growth of those tumor organoids in those other types of tumors. And on an interesting note, this rebexinib drug is now actually has been granted the active investigational new drug status by the FDA. So now it's set to enter clinic for patients in phase 1. So we're very excited about that too. So hopefully all this space research is also able to help with generate preclinical data and make sure that we can go to these IND status and hopefully one day approved drugs from the research that we did here on the International Space Station, and then hopefully one day on the
Yes.
Axiom Space Station. So
And
this is just one of them. We have several other areas that we're looking into as well, and I'm happy to go into them too.
oh
And
yeah.
just very briefly to mention them.
Yeah.
Yeah, go ahead,
No,
David.
I was just saying, I would say thank you for the you and your team at Axiom Space and University of California, San Diego for the work research you do because I'm a cancer survivor. I'm currently taking tamoxifen, and I think there need to be other opportunities to help men, especially me, who have a very small capability because I have breast cancer. And I had breast cancer in type 1, and there's only 10% of the world population. Hundreds of men yearly that get this disease, and we need to eliminate it as much as it is in women, is in men as well. And I think the public need to understand how important your research is from that perspective. And I personally understand and appreciate it.
Absolutely, David. Yeah. This is why it's so important for us to continue these research, and this is why we're very happy to be working with Dr. Catriona Jameson. And as you have witnessed yourself as well, they have been very actively involved in the patient community as well, with lots of patient advocates for this type of research as well. So this is just one of the partners, but they have been really showing showcasing why it's important to do this research in microgravity.
So since we're in the microgravity subject, and I want you to continue what you said, add more elusive to the opportunities to educate the public about what Axion is doing currently. The phase of biomanufacturing is a huge emphasis in the microgravity, and I think a lot of people think it's science fiction. I don't know. Today they think it's science fiction and more of everything's coming up science normal, as I would say. And so let's ground it and look at how the differences between microgravity, zero gravity, and the way things sink and float away have a specific guidance on how biological materials can be grown and used and replicated in space. I think that's a very important piece from scientific reasoning to look at how we can educate ourselves and find cures for certain things that you're doing currently, which are projects you're working on.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, one thing that I do have actually a visual for this one I'm presenting, and it's actually taken from another colleague of mine. I thought that it was a brilliant slide, but basically, the way to think about it is if you're going back to your everything that you've learned in high school or in college, and you have all these like formulas and like physics and so on, and you always have that constant g there that you don't really think about because it's always there, so you automatically always put it on. But now imagine you remove that g from the equation. The results of that equation are going to be different, and this is exactly what happens in microgravity. So some of the physical forces that change. Of course, there's no sedimentation, there's no buoyancy, there's no convection. And then if we look uh, at the biological systems, well, we've observed that since the shuttle program, that the cells tend to aggregate much easier. So all these efforts here on the ground into making these three-dimensional structures mimicking different organs in a human body, well, they're made in a much more homogeneous way in microgravity. So if we are able to make these types of human models even in microgravity in a much more homogeneous, much less variable way, we'll have better chances of finding cures that we were not really able to find. Some of the things that we are doing using these three-dimensional structures that are much easily made in microgravity as well. We're looking into cancer models, these tumor organelles that I already mentioned, but we're also looking into how we can leverage this cell aggregation and the way that the cells signal between each other differently, how we can leverage that into uh, making things like stem cell manufacturing much more broadly available. Because of course, right now we can manufacture stem cells here on the ground, but there's several bottlenecks. The efficiencies are not great. There's a lot of variability, lots of genetic instability, and things like that. Even though there's very good results coming from different countries, like your audience might have heard that the first stem cell derived treatment for Parkinson's disease has been approved in Japan. So that has been pretty big in the
Yes.
neuroscience community. So we're hoping that there's going to be more and more of that type of treatment available. But this is one of the things that we're looking right now in microgravity. How can we make stem cell manufacturing more broadly available and much more efficient in microgravity? And this is the work that we're doing with the Cedar Sinai folks. Another thing that we're also doing is while we're generating these three-dimensional structures is one thing to know about stem cells is when you're generating these three-dimensional structures from stem cells, they're mimicking human organs, but they're mimicking the very, very early stages of a human organ, meaning they're really mimicking the fetal stages before you're even born. So that might be great for diseases like autism and things like that that happen and that start in mother's womb, but they're not necessarily very good models for diseases where age is the main risk factor. So some of the things that come to mind are diseases like Alzheimer's, Parkinson's, ALS, multiple sclerosis, and all those things. So one other thing that we have observed with one other partner, so their National Stem Cell Foundation, led by Dr. Paula Grisanti, they have conducted multiple missions to the International Space Station, and what they have observed is that those brain organoids, when they're sent to space for about a month, they actually mature much faster than they would here on the ground. So really now the idea is to leverage microgravity to make better disease models for human diseases where age is the main risk factor, because
Right.
we are very much limited. Even if you leave these cultures for a very long time here on the ground, they will never come to those later stages of a human organ age, basically. So this is one other way that we're leveraging microgravity.
That is awesome. And for the audience out there, if you're new to the stem cells and new to medicine, and you want to get more involved, stem cells, we all have them. They don't last long outside the human body. They're the basic building blocks of you. Because before you're born, your stem cells become who you are today, and they grow into you. So this is very important research. They use them to cure a lot of autoimmune diseases today. So people look at giving stem cells to cure autoimmune diseases across the board, or to give them a livelihood to live longer in the complexity of the multifaceted diseases they encompass and have to deal with on a daily basis. One of the things I want to talk to you about as well is, as we walk through and look at these samples of material you're bringing back after you do the research on the International Space Station, how do you construct and research ways to keep the samples and products that are coming down re-entry through the pipeline consistent and safe and habitable, so you can continue your research once they get to your facilities on the continent? The planet, excuse me.
Yeah, this is an excellent point because, of course, we're trying to get to where we can have a commercial product that can go either into patients, hopefully one day, or go back to pharma or biotech, so they can. One thing is to show that we have very good chain of custody and very tight timelines. So this is something that we, as Axiom Space, we've been very methodic about, because of course when we're working with biological systems, we are able to hand them over. So basically, when you're about to send some samples to space, I'm going to give a little bit more background on how we do space research, because it's not maybe currently, at least, not how everyone would imagine. So there's several timelines that we have to respect through that are put out there by NASA and ISS National Lab. So we have certain paperwork that we have to give them at a certain time when we're designing an experiment, or when we're handing our science experiment to the NASA folks, so then they can go and put in the rocket. And of course, there are some variables like the launch attempt, because the vehicle does not necessarily launch on the day of, and then sometimes we have to wait. But this is why when we're talking to researchers, we always put in place some plans to mitigate any issues with the science experiment, so they are good enough for a certain period of time. So this is all part of the ground studies that we establish. And then, of course, when there's a splashdown and the and the whole rocket comes back down, we have to make sure that the samples are retrieved first and then sent back to given back to the customer or the science teams right away. So there are, depending on what temperature the science experiment is stable at, there are certain times that we have to respect. And I'm actually very proud to say that as Axiom Space, throughout Axiom missions, we've been very good at doing as late of a load to the rocket as possible and as early as we can get the samples back, even though sometimes those samples were at ambient temperature. So maybe they could have waited a little bit longer, but in order to show that we have the chain of custody and then we can make a commercial product viable, we were able to implement these. What can appear as small changes, but if we're thinking commercially, they are very important milestones that we were able to put together. Another thing that we've been doing is we're in very close contact with the Food and Drug Administration, just to make sure that we are abiding also by their requirements. And really, the idea of doing research should not be, oh, this is now a complete different environment, we're going to have new rules or things like that, but actually showing them that we already have all the different checkpoints that are in place for the products that we make here on the ground. Those same processes already exist for space flight, and then this will be just instead of doing your experiment down the lab in San Diego, it will be only 250 miles up on the International Space Station or Axiom Space Station. So really, the idea is to not to add more layers into the process that is already quite complete, but rather just translating them into what we're doing here with the space flight.
You went through a lot of different pieces there in your answer, how you bring samples down, how the samples are then giving to the customers, and how you secure those samples and make sure there's consistency between the research done in orbit and the factors that you're trying to go after and find cures for certain situations with certain diseases and cancers in particularly. So you really talked about the supply chain. And I think part of our discussions today in looking at the research in biomedical engineering and biomedical research is that it is a very fragile supply chain. Could you talk more about those collaboration efforts for your supply chain and how its anticipation of trying to make it faster has also looked at ways to be innovative in you doing your work so that you can provide the results that you're trying to do from a research standpoint?
Absolutely. I think one thing that I personally was able to witness working at Axiom Space is through our different private astronaut missions, we were actually able to bring together a lot of different folks from different backgrounds into the space flight and microgravity research, and we were able to make a lot of different types of collaborations that are very complementary to each other. Either it's through a new type of engineering, transport, or scientists from other backgrounds, countries that might have different types of resources, and really bringing them together. And in fact, I'm just going to mention this because I think it's quite remarkable. But through these different countries that we have flown, we are now able to establish collaborations with several of them between them, and then with Axiom Space, we're able to help them get their science into space. But we launched the Global University Alliance, and this is really the goal of this alliance is really to identify the gaps in microgravity research or in space biomanufacturing or advanced materials, and really set out the priorities for the community and see how we can harbor these collaborations in a faster pace. One thing that this also brings is, for instance, if we're making different types of therapies, like for instance, for diseases where the population that is touched is very heterogeneous, so it's very hard to find a cure that works for all. Well, now if we're working with different countries, now we're able to extend those type of preclinical studies or even clinical studies into those different populations. So now you have a much better chance of testing your product, or hopefully the therapy that's going to work in a certain disease in a much broader population, which is really what we should be doing. And sometimes when we're all isolated
Yes.
in the US in one lab or one institution, it's very hard to get your hands onto like this broader community. So this is one thing that we were able to help with as well. So I'm very happy to see that. And the other thing that has been great is in the U.S. There are now several institutions that have space medicine as a new center. So UC San Diego started that with the Ice Core Institute, of course, that David you are familiar with.
Yes.
So that helps attract different types of space communities, but also biotechs, pharma. So this is really what we really need to have to get this community growing and then working together. There are through these types of institutions, we're also able to get some attention from the investors, venture capitalists, and things like that. So, because of course this is going to require some funds, and then everyone to work together. Now, the Cedar Sinai team also just inaugurated their space center on the East Coast. We have, of course, uh, um, Wake Forest Institute for Regenerative Medicine. There's this Trivedi Institute at University of Pittsburgh, and of course University of Florida. We have Sea Stars. So there's several of them already going, and then there now we just need to establish the networks throughout all of them. And I think them then working with international partners is how we're going to get to the next generation of therapies much quicker.
Yeah, I've seen some breakthroughs in therapy that would be great, and looking at how research with your consortium of universities and companies could help with that. One of the things is replacing and taking metals out of your bloodstream to make sure you live longer, purifying blood, stuff like that. It would be an easier way to do it, and taking somebody's blood supply off for 2 or 3 days and then put it back in their body. So that's a great opportunity. So could you tell me what is your 5 year, if you have a 5 year approach to this, and what you see once you guys put the space station up and it's operational, where you would be the next 5 years, and then we'll close it out, and then possibly may have a second podcast, because this is very interesting technology, and I would love to educate the masses more about what Ms. Mesci and her team is doing out there at Axiom Space.
Thanks, David. So on the biomanufacturing side, I think what's going to happen is probably, I mean, what I would like to see happen in the next 5 years is while continuing generating this preclinical data, but also a lot of the projects that we've been doing here in the US is through grants that have been, awarded by NASA. So the and I think it's worth mentioning because they have awarded a number of them. These are NASA in space production of applications, uh, really projects that are made towards making commercial products that we can only make on microgravity that are benefiting life here on Earth. So all these projects that I mentioned, the stem cell manufacturing, the cancer research, disease models for different diseases, they have been all awarded by NASA, and we've been very much supportive of this program. So all of those awards, so there's three phases to this award. The first phase being the proof of concept. So yes or no, is there a really a way of making these products in microgravity that is unique and we cannot make here on the ground? Once the proof of concept is done, then we can go then to pilot scale manufacturing on the ISS. And then as a phase three, going into full scale manufacturing for now, making it widely available for pharma and biotech and hopefully patients. So we're actually at the cusp of like the ending of the first phase. So a lot of those projects have already proven that there is a benefit of microgravity, and we are going transitioning into that second phase already, which in the span of just a couple of years, I think this is a remarkably fast pace. So I think this is just going to go more and more faster and faster. So I think in maybe 5 years, hopefully, we're going to have products that have already been through that have served as like preclinical data, that will already had preclinical data that is hopefully strong enough to hopefully maybe go into clinic, maybe even talking about making some of the products widely available for pharma. I mean, of course, I know that the FDA process of approval is going to be a while, and then it's also going to depend on how this transport is hopefully cheaper and cheaper as well to get to space and back. But yeah, I think that we're going to by then have a lot of data generated for preclinical things and studies for a lot of these areas, and then be be able to find some new therapies for patients that will then would need to be tested in clinical trials. I
I
think we're going to
absolutely
have some
agree.
of those products in 5 years. Not approved, but at least on the path of going into approvals.
Well, hopefully, we get the approval process a little more streamlined by then. This is years away. Technology and AI inclusion of that would be an acceptable opportunity to see where we can look where humans can't look and improve things that are more efficient for humans in a acceptable manner for things like this are very critical for our growth and our living conditions. So,
Absolutely.
so
Yeah,
in
I'm very
closing,
excited. I think this is a very
yeah.
exciting time.
Yes, it's so exciting. We can talk about this for 2 or 3 hours. I think we may need to have a series on this to talk more about it if you're okay with that. But let people know how they can find you, ways they can get more understanding of what Axiom can do, and how important this is to our ecosystem. Just a little snippet on that, and then we can close out today.
Oh yes, I mean the space is really for everyone, and I think we're coming to a point where it's not going to be just career astronauts or engineers or folks like traditional aerospace folks that are going to be in there, but it's going to be a lot of different types of people from different backgrounds. I mean, I am myself a stem cell biologist and a neuroscientist, and I would have never thought that I would end up in a space company, but here we are. And I think we're gonna need a lot of people from different diverse backgrounds. We're gonna need scientists, astronauts. So hopefully, we'll get to a point where instead of going to the next lab to conduct your experiment, you're just gonna go to the Axiom Space Station to conduct your experiment, and you're just gonna come back. Because of course, more and more, the more we're doing more complex, cutting edge technology type experiments, we're gonna need people with those skill set as well, and those are very hard to just translate to another person without that whole background that they might have. And in fact, I'm just going to mention this because it was quite remarkable. During AX2, we flew the first Arab woman, Rayana Barnawi, from Kingdom of Saudi Arabia, and she's a stem cell biologist. And we could really see the difference of her hands when
Yeah.
she was conducting all our research. She was absolutely remarkable. And I think more and more those types of people. And I think there's also going to be different types of jobs that are going to emerge, and I'm just going to finish with that because it makes me chuckle, but I think it's also it shows you how kids think already ahead of you. I have a very close friend, and she has a 6-year-old son, and he's been always very fond of space, and he's obviously following all the things that Axiom Space has been doing. He already met a couple of astronauts, and then when I ask him like, what do you want to be in the future, and he's like, oh, I want to be an astronaut chef. I want to cook for the astronauts in space. And I was like, oh, wow, that's such an interesting career that I had not really thought about. But, I think we're going to have those types of potential jobs as well in the future as the whole humanity will be given access to microgravity.
Thank you, Dr. Pesky, for being on our podcast today. And thank you for letting everybody know where to find you and learn more about Axiom Space and our space station and technology innovations going forward. Thank you, everybody, for tuning in to Supplying Space on the IDAI Podcast Network. I'm your host, David Beck. Thank you, and see you next time.